Hello and welcome. There is greater geopolitical and geoeconomic uncertainty at this moment than there has at any point in time in recent political history. And when there are so many unknowns up in the air, who better than the world's top foreign affairs guru Fareed Zakaria to try and give our viewers a sense of what to make of the Donald Trump presidency and the impact this has in India and the rest of the world. Fareed Zakaria, for taking out time and joining us here at the India Today studios. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure to see you.
Absolute delight to have you. When there's so many things happening and people wondering what's going on, just as you wrap your head around the first thing that Donald Trump has done, there's another big announcement he's making, and then everybody's trying to chase and understand what that means. From what you were expecting from Donald Trump to what he's done in his first few days in office, what are your initial impressions of Trump 2.0?
I think the most important one is that the guardrails are off. When Trump won the first time in 2016, he didn't think he was going to win. And we know this for sure. I have this out from very good authorities. And so he stumbles into the presidency and he takes with him two very important groups of people who act as guardrails. The old Republican establishment. Remember, his first chief of staff is a man named Reince Priebus, the chairman of the Republican National Committee, whom he barely knew. And he brings in also 3-4 generals, because he admires generals, and he thinks they're going to help him execute his vision. And in both cases, what he found, I think I'm now going to speak from his point of view, is that they were not fundamentally loyal to him. I think they would say they were loyal to the country and the Constitution more than to him. But whatever it was, he realized these people were not going to execute his vision. Trump 2.0 has none of these people. There are no members of the Republican establishment. There are no generals, you notice. It's all people who have expressed absolute devotion and loyalty to Trump. So what that means is you are going to see the Trump agenda enacted, implemented, as much as possible. Now, there will be some hard realities that you confront. Domestically, the hard realities are America is still a constitutional democracy. So, for example, he said everyone has to get back to work 5 days a week. Now, I am basically in favor of that. I tend to think it's the right idea. But there is a federal employees union that has a contract in which they negotiated a certain work from home provision. I'm sure they will take him to court. I'm sure there will be some. So there will be, there's what you're seeing now is a flurry of almost declarations of intent. That doesn't always translate. And then the second, of course, is in the international sphere. Trump loves to upend, and to get people on edge. I'm going to annex Canada and it will be the 51st state. Obviously, many of those things aren't actually going to happen. So what we have to say is, where's the end state? What is he trying to do here? And in many of those cases, again, if you go back to Trump 1, he didn't succeed. In some cases, he did. So right now what you're seeing is a flurry of activity and declarations, much of it designed almost like a psychological game with his allies and adversaries.
You're saying he'll be able to get done what he wants and what's on his agenda, but that also seems to keep changing. He, for example, took a very strong position on TikTok, wanted TikTok banned, and then hours before that actually happens, he gives them an extension. So his agenda also seems to be very fluid and nebulous.
So Donald Trump, for the most part, has very few fixed political views. Very unusual, I think, for a politician at his level. But what, and so you're absolutely right. There's an enormous amount of fluidity. He may change his mind about something. I think it's worth noticing something, though, which is really quite stunning. The loyalty that he has, that his base gives him, the trust he has. So he is the man who, as you say, in his first term, banned TikTok by an executive order, and his base cheered. He now comes and he unbans TikTok with an executive order, and his base cheers. Even that unban, by the way, might not actually happen. But, again, here there's a bit of a comparison with Modi. Modi has some of that. But I don't think I've ever seen anyone, certainly not in an advanced industrial democracy with, supposedly educated voters and things like that. I've never seen anything like this. I mean, this guy can reverse himself on almost anything. and his base would say, "We support you."
The Argentinian president was here. If you join all the trends that we're seeing internationally, what's the image of the leader who's emerging, who manages to win votes at this time? There's several similarities and some dissimilarities between Prime Minister Modi and Donald Trump, and since that equation will be so critical to what happens between India and the US, do you want to shed some light on similarities, dissimilarities, and this populist kind of leader who seems to be winning at the expense of the more liberal leader?
So I think the core similarity is anti-establishment, outsider, disruptor, and that sense that you're coming into power, kind of over the backs of a long established political establishment. So the Argentinian is like that. Erdogan was like that when he came in. Modi was like that. Trump is like that. Now the interesting question is, at what point, after how many years in power do you become the establishment, or can you keep running as the anti-establishment candidate? I mean, Prime Minister Modi has now been in power a long time, and yet he has managed to, in some way, still present himself as the outsider. This is Donald Trump's second term in the presidency, but he still presents himself. Part of that, the skill of a populist outsider is to claim to be the outsider, and the right in America does it by saying all the cultural institutions are captured by the left, the universities, the media, and things like that. And again, there is that similarity with Modi. So I think there's a lot in common, and they're both very skilled politicians. I think Prime Minister Modi is a much more detailed policy wonk in a way that Donald Trump is not. Donald Trump is much more intuitive. He's much more, he can change his mind every day. I don't think those pieces of it are less true of Modi. Modi is somebody who looks at policy carefully, makes decisions in a fairly analytic way, follows them through. Now, he may make political choices, not to implement something or the other. But that part of Trump I wouldn't say it's unique, but it's very rare for somebody to come that high up in the Western political establishment, not that concerned about the details of policy.
President Trump is railing against Canada, continuing to call Canada America's 51st state. He's insisting he wants Greenland. He wants to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. He wants the Panama Canal. What exactly is he aiming for? Because surely Canada can't become America's 51st state. What does he want?
So it's a very good question. I think, what Trump is going for is the idea that, look, what is his slogan? Make America great again. So he wants both the symbols and substance. So the symbols are, you rename, the Gulf of Mexico and you call it the Gulf of America. It's a cheap thing. Most countries won't follow along, but
can you do it? I mean, if it's the Gulf of Mexico, can you suddenly say it's now the Gulf of America?
I remember growing up in India, every time you would get maps from outside the country, the borders would be blacked out because the Indian government did not agree with the borders that were being drawn by Encyclopedia Britannica between India and Pakistan. So it's a little bit like that. America will call it the Gulf of America. I don't know that other countries will do it. Maybe a few American allies will do it. Maybe Saudi Arabia will do it. But it sends this rah-rah patriotic signal. With the others, I think there's a very interesting kind of worldview that Trump has, which is that America's allies, not adversaries, allies, have taken advantage of it. And that America has been, too willing to accommodate itself to its allies. If you talk to people around the world, that is not the impression people have of America. They have the impression of America, which is a very powerful country, gets its own way, writes its own rules, gets special exemptions for whatever it wants. And I think that's factually closer to the truth. But for Trump, he's obsessed with this idea that he needs to get a better deal for America on Earth. So everything is part of a negotiating strategy. So the Canada thing is he wants to reopen trade negotiations with Canada. So throw them off guard, throw them off balance, try to get them to be guessing as to what's happening. With Panama, maybe he wants a better deal on the Panama Canal, what they charge the U.S. Navy. Maybe he wants to put a base there. Does he really mean that he's going to go in and use military force and invade Canada and conquer it? very much doubt that that's what he's thinking. I think he'll find the Canadians are proud nationalists like many countries. With Greenland, again, he probably wants significantly bigger basing rights and mineral rights and things like that. You could probably get these other ways. There are many ways to negotiate, but Trump's way is always put the other guy on the defensive, do something that psychologically unnerves him and puts him on the back foot. The danger, to my mind, is America has built enormous goodwill with these countries, with its allies in Europe, in Asia, over 8 decades. And that's why these countries have sided with America in all kinds of wars, geopolitical contests against the Soviet Union, against Russia, against China, against Islamic terror. That is built because you conduct international relations not as one-on-one transactions where you always win, the other guy loses, but as relationships. You're not just thinking about the transaction, you're thinking about the long-term relationship.
But is this the madman theory at work? Because all the research that I read about President Nixon, and when this was attempted in the past in the academic research around it, seems to suggest it doesn't work. So it's not as if he can pull this off and be successful at it. Does the madman theory in your mind work?
No, you're exactly right. I mean, Nixon tried it very, very often. He talked about explicitly, and the case he was talking about, just so people understand, was with Vietnam, with North Vietnam as it was called then, which is I'll bomb them a little bit, I'd make it out that I could even use nuclear weapons. They didn't buy it at all. Nations have a very shrewd understanding of what you're trying to do, what your interests are, how far you go. So I very much doubt, for example, he's, threatened Russia with tariffs or if they don't come to the negotiating table. I don't know what he's talking about because we already have sanctions on Russia. No Russian goods enter the United States anyway. So what tariffs would? So Putin is not stupid. He knows that that's an empty threat. So I suspect that this is just part of Trump's. It's the way he is. I'll give you an example. In 2017, when he first meets the president of Panama, he's President Trump then. First thing he says to him is, "You charge us too much for our Navy." Now the Panama Canal Authority charges the U.S. Navy $1 million a year. The U.S. defense budget is $800 billion. So that is roughly 0.0001% of the Pentagon budget, or 0.00. It's the fourth decimal place. Why is he doing that? I mean, the President of the United States is trying to haggle, and get a discount.
Why is he doing that?
Because it's his nature. I mean, he's like a bazari. He goes in, you know people like this, I know people like this, very rich people, they go into Chor Bazaar and they will not pay the retail price. And they'll say, no, that bag of spices, that garam masala, you're charging me 14 rupees, I'll pay you 9. Now, for somebody worth what they are, and then they'll get to 12 rupees. You've saved 3 rupees on a bag of garam masala. It's that sense that I got a deal. I pushed you. And again, the danger is, yeah, fine, you can do that, but, what does that do to the relationship? What does that do to the trust?
But it also allows other world leaders to play a man like that because his negotiating playbook, his tactics are quite easy to understand, and over a period of time, leaders get the hang of it. I heard Christian Lagarde say Europe needs to carry checkbooks when they're talking to Donald Trump. So that's as far as Europe is concerned, they're friends. But Russia, China, adversaries, with a very different kind of equation. Do you fear they could play Trump?
Yeah, look, flatter him, announce big deals. You might have seen in the last couple of days there was this big deal announced about a $100 billion data center. So if you read through the lines, and Elon Musk has pointed this out, it's actually a $10 billion investment. SoftBank is putting in $5 billion, Oracle is $5 billion, and then they say they're going to raise more, and I'm sure they will. But money in the bank right now seems to be 10. It's very Trumpian to announce 100 and then to say it's going to be 500. And now that's just thin air. But he likes that, so everyone plays to that and says we'll come up with the biggest number we can and we'll announce it. And and the other funny thing about this was, so they announced the deal, and then outside they asked Larry Ellison of Oracle, so is the deal when is it going to happen? And he says, well, it only could have happened because of President Trump. And they say, yeah, but when is it going to happen? He said, oh, construction began 6 months ago. So it can only happen because of him, but it already began last year.
But Trump is demonstrating two very different instincts. One, he wants to pull America away from the rest of the world and just look inwards. On the other, he says, I want to be the peacemaker. I want to end wars. Are those two instincts at odds with each other in your view? And it seems a lot of people seem to think he wants the Nobel Prize for peace. Could he get it in this term?
I think you're right that those are both they're at odds. And I think the reality is there again, he's a very skillful politician. He knows that's what his constituency, his base wants to hear. It's a nationalist, working class base that thinks America has worried too much about the world and worried too much about all these wars and peace, and why aren't we, fixing the problems at home? So that's the rhetoric. But as you say, he also, clearly likes the idea of being the leader of the free world, likes the idea of being the most powerful leader in the world, and wants to use that in a way that, helps the world, but also helps him personally, which gets us to the Nobel Prize. Look, if the United States has enormous political leverage now, I think in some ways it has more leverage now than it's had for decades, just because China is not doing so well, Russia is obviously very much on the back foot, Iran has been weakened, so its adversaries are all weakened. And by the way, Joe Biden should get some credit for that. But because of that, if the President of the United States puts a certain amount of time, energy, attention, yes, he might well be able to deliver results. I think on the crucial one, Ukraine, Donald Trump has begun to realize, and you see this in his last few tweets and statements, that the problem he faces in getting peace in Ukraine is not with Ukraine, but with Russia. It's Putin is the guy who's not willing to negotiate.
Can he browbeat Vladimir Putin? I saw the post he put out on Truth Social. It's surreal. You won't imagine that the sitting president of the United States is virtually threatening Putin.
Yeah.
You have a good understanding of Putin's mind. What do you think is the thinking in Russia at this moment? Do they just want this war to drag on and tire the West out? Does Putin think he can win? Can Trump force him into some kind of a peace deal?
So Putin, whom I have met several times, absolutely thinks he can win. Putin is a very disciplined person. He's very intelligent. He's very well briefed. He understands his version of Russian history very well. And for him, that version says, when Russia stays the course, suffers the pain, is willing to take the body blows, and is willing to keep going, it can outlast anyone. It outlasted Napoleon. It outlasted Hitler. That's his model. That the West is feckless. There's going to be infighting among democracies. They'll lose faith. They will not have the ability to have that kind of staying power. He does. And inexorably, slowly, he will grind the Ukrainians down. I think it is the challenge of the democracies to show that that's not true. And in fact, historically, the United States says, it outlasted Hitler's Germany, it outlasted Stalin's Soviet Union, it outlasted Al-Qaeda. But this is always the danger with democracies. So what I think Trump has to realize is that it's all very well to talk about being a deal maker, but in order to be a deal maker, you first need to put enough pressure on Putin that he feels he needs to make a deal. Right now, I don't think Putin thinks he needs to make a deal. He feels that as long as he keeps pushing forward, events will move in his direction. You can only make a deal if Putin thinks he's not winning on the battlefield, and he's not winning.
But Trump doesn't want to supply weapons and money to Zelensky. That just ensures that Putin then has the upper hand.
This is the problem.
So how can he win and not put down the money?
I think he'll find that tariffs, as I say, against Russia, it's meaningless. Russia is already sanctioned. There is no Russian exports coming out. The thing that matters most to Putin is defeat on the battlefield. And the only way you can achieve that defeat on the battlefield is more military weaponry to Ukraine. The Ukrainians are willing to die for their country. They just need the weapons.
So what do you see happen? Because first it was before I come to power, then it seemed to become 100 days. Will anything happen within these 100 days between Russia and Ukraine that Donald Trump is trying to ensure? Because he's also an egoistic man. The more Putin pushes back, the more his ego gets enraged.
I think Putin knows that, and so the question I have here is Putin is not going to be simply defiant. He's going to try to do something. He's going to very much try to get that meeting with Donald Trump. I think that that's a mistake. The meeting with Putin should be a reward for some Russian concessions. You shouldn't straight away meet with Putin. Putin has been an outcast. He has been a pariah. Very few people are meeting with him. He's not invited to all the conferences. He has to be careful. By the way, he's also under indictment in The Hague, so he has certain challenges there. So there should be a process of saying, we can imagine that there will be a summit meeting between you and President Trump if you do these things. So the whole thing needs to be, I think this is where we get into the complexity of geopolitics and diplomacy. And I think Trump would do very well to have, some people, who have the negotiating skill and prowess, who've done this before. People like Kissinger understood this is a chess game. You don't just, make a statement like that. You have to figure out how do you put him in a position where you do the negotiation. So I think that is one of the limitations of this strategy of kind of bluster and bluff.
Israel has started phase 1 of ceasefire with the Hamas. The conversation now is about whether there will be a phase 2. The other question is about whether Netanyahu can push through on his threat of forcing a regime change in Iran, and whether Trump would back a military takeout of nuclear facilities in Iran. How do you see the situation in West Asia play out, and what do you think is actually going on in Trump's mind?
So the first thing to say is it's really important to understand that the Middle East has been reshaped. It's a fundamentally new landscape now. And that's not so much because of what has happened in Gaza. Let's leave that aside for a moment. And I understand people have very strong views about the humanitarian catastrophe that is Gaza. But put that aside for a minute because it doesn't have that much geopolitical significance. What Israel did in the north, the destruction of Hezbollah, the destruction of Iran's air defense, its total destruction, all of that then resulted in the collapse of Assad's government, in part because after all, who was propping up Assad? It was the Iranians and the Russians, has created a completely new Middle East. The Middle East for 15 years has been dominated by this struggle between Iran and its proxies, Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and Israel and the Gulf Arabs on the other side. Those forces, Israel and the Gulf Arabs, are now totally dominant. Iran is on the back foot. It is much weaker.
Why was Iran found to be so weak in the battlefield? Why all the proxies that they built up, which was supposed to be their great strength, why did they just fall apart like a pack of cards?
I think two things. One, we didn't realize the degree to which the Syrian civil war, I think, sapped an enormous amount of the strength of the Hezbollah militias, the Iranian militias. There's a lot of money and people that went to fight to prop up the Assad government. And remember, that took almost 10 years, so it's a very... The second, I think, is a very useful reminder for us. Whenever we look at these kind of regimes, dictatorships, theocracies, closed, repressive, they tend to be much less effective on the ground than you realize. That they're often corrupt, they often have problems motivating people. So Hezbollah started out as this lean, mean fighting machine from the 1980s. Now it had become one of the corrupt, political parties in Lebanon. Iran itself has become a very corrupt, dysfunctional regime. So I think that there's a lesson there that, we sometimes think of these adversaries as 10 feet tall. Think about how everyone talked about Saddam Hussein and his nuclear weapons, or even the Soviet Union in the old days. There's the reality about democracies, and this is very true of India, is everybody's always criticizing. So everyone has, it's like we wash our dirty laundry in public. But there's a hidden strength in that resilience and flexibility.
Can there be a regime change in Iran? Are the circumstances apt? If Netanyahu pushes, will Trump back a military attack on nuclear facilities? What's your reading of what's happening inside?
I don't think so. I think that the Israelis have done so much damage. They now know that Iran is almost naked and vulnerable. They could go in at any point. They could destroy more. But if they were to take that final step of really trying to absolutely have this kind of, you need a major strike, because a lot of the nuclear facilities are buried deep. You then need to go into the military cantonments where they the IRGC, the Republican, not the Republican Guard, the Revolutionary Guards are, that, then you create a huge, what we have seen about the Middle East is regime change in the Middle East can spiral in very many directions and in many ways that are not predictable. I'm not sure that the Israelis, that there's any great advantage to them in doing that. Who knows what regime would replace
But is Netanyahu thinking the same way? For him, it's the greatest victory. He goes down as Israel's greatest leader ever.
If it all goes well. Bibi Netanyahu is more cautious than people realize. When after the October 7th attack, he went after Gaza in a big way. But the IDF, the Israeli military, had actually wanted to go north and deal with Hezbollah. They said, let's take this opportunity. He didn't want to do it. It took him a while to get convinced that this was the right moment. So I think he's calculating, he's cautious. He may want to, he's right now, frankly, in a powerful position, even domestically. He's destroyed Hamas, he's destroyed Hezbollah, he's weakened Iran, Assad is gone, all on his watch. That's a pretty impressive position to be in.
Let's speak for a moment about relations between India and the United States. Largely, there's been bipartisan support. There have been some bumps towards the end on some legal cases, on some targeted supposed assassination attempts in the United States. But how do you see Modi and Trump and India and the United States play out over the next 4 years? Is Trump going to insist that Modi and India back America more and take America's side more openly and firmly than it has in the past?
I don't think so. I think on this one, there will be more continuity than people might expect, because we saw that in Trump 1. The truth is, at this point, India and the US's relationship is beyond personalities. It has essentially become a structural, strategic alliance in which both countries recognize there are deep benefits to maintaining and deepening the cooperation. There are going to be problems; those are dealt with in a fairly, in a diplomatic way. I suspect that what you're going to see with Trump is very, very strong geopolitical alliance. He does have a few things that he cares about, which is, sometimes around the H-1Bs, and India is also a very protectionist country. So he may push those issues, but I don't think he cares as much because India is not a big enough economic player that it affects the American economy, the fact that India is protectionist. And Trump doesn't particularly care about free trade. He just wants a good deal between the United States and India. So if India is protectionist and has barriers to he doesn't care. His concern about Canada and the EU, it's all just about America. And you're not letting American goods in the same terms as. So there may be a little bit of push there. I actually think it would be good for India to open up its borders more. One of the reasons India hasn't been able to move as fast in manufacturing is because it has many protectionist barriers. Because a lot of what you manufacture these days, you're assembling, and the intermediate goods that you bring in have very high tariffs. So the cost of manufacturing in India is too high. If Trump's pressure makes India open up a little bit, it's good for India.
How do you see the China-India dynamic play out over the next 4 years? China's army was heavily deployed on the line of actual control since Galwan. Almost as suddenly and abruptly as they came in, they dialed back. Now disengagement has been proceeding. Do you see this thawing of relations between Delhi and Beijing pick pace over the next 4 years?
I think it fundamentally depends on whether Xi Jinping came into power with a very particular set of ideas. A much more aggressive China around the world, a much stronger Chinese Communist Party at home, a much weaker private sector. And in all those areas, I would argue, he has failed. His wolf warrior diplomacy resulted in India becoming much more hostile to China than it had been before the Himalaya stuff. Australia becoming much more hostile to China before they made those 14-point demands. The Philippines, which he thought he had flipped back to the United States and invited American forces in. You go country after country. Europe had been on the verge of signing a trade deal with China, and then that has completely gone away. Similarly, domestically, you look, the private sector economy being battered has been terrible for the Chinese economy. So the question is really, is China capable of course correction? Is Xi Jinping capable of understanding that these policies have not borne fruit and they need to be changed, dialed back? There's been some dialing back, as you say, the troops have withdrawn, but in economic terms, there's still a certain amount of economic, I wouldn't say warfare, but there's tension between the US and between India and China. I don't get the sense that Xi has fundamentally understood that his policy was all wrong, that he needs to look. If Xi Jinping wanted to create problems for America in Asia, the single best thing he could do is have a major rapprochement with India, solve the border issue, get rid of all these bans on Chinese investment. And, it's not impossible for that to happen if he were to really actively pursue it. He hasn't. China has 16 borders. I think I'm right in this. 15 of them it has resolved. The one border dispute it has never resolved is with India. I think there's something for the Chinese. Maybe it's just this idea of India is the other big Asian power. Maybe it's the fact that the border is around Tibet, which is a very sensitive area for China. But for whatever reason, the Chinese have been reluctant to fully embrace the idea of a rapprochement with India.
There's a lot of talk about the Chinese economy being in a bad space at this moment. You're reading, because it's almost like trying to read in a dark room. How bad is the situation in mainland China at this moment, and how could that impact Xi's game plan as he deals with Trump and the rest of the world?
It's in bad shape. In the sense that it is not going to grow any time at the 6, 7, 8% that it was growing at. Private sector sentiment is bad. Consumer sentiment is bad. There's a short-term issue, which is, are they willing to open up stimulus so that the economy can get better? But I think they will face a larger challenge, which is, again, Xi's philosophy has been a turn away from the model that frankly made China rich, which was unleash the private sector, unleash openness, innovation. China, even now, is a much more open economy to the world than India is. And that was why it grew so fast. But Xi has decided that was, either that's wrong or we had enough of that. So if you give you a case study, artificial intelligence. Xi wants China to do very well in artificial intelligence. But how is America doing well in artificial intelligence? By allowing companies like Google and Amazon and Meta, and Microsoft to scale up, become what they call these hyperscalers, have massive capacity. What China is doing is they're killing Alibaba and Tencent and Baidu, their equivalents of those great internet digital companies. They want it to be a kind of government-led consortium, government-led investment, government-led innovation. I mean, historically, that has a mixed record. And so my guess is that that's the larger problem. Xi thinks he can get to first world economy status through a kind of government-led, government-first policy. Now, there are some advantages to government investment, but ultimately, you need the innovation of the private sector. You need the trial and error also. Some of these things are going to go badly, and you've got to let those companies die. As in government, we know that never happens. So the whole model is, I think, right now in trouble. And then you have the demographic challenge. So I think that overall, look, please don't forget, China is the second largest economy in the world. It's 4.5 times the size of the Indian economy. This is a very impressive achievement. But it does seem to be stuck in the middle income trap. The number of countries that have made it past the middle income trap to first world status are very few.
Sure.
Japan, Korea, maybe you could say Malaysia is getting on the way, Chile in Latin America, Israel. That's it. Think about that. There are almost 200 countries in the world, and we can count on one hand the number of non-Western countries that have broken the middle income barrier. It's a cautionary tale for India. India isn't there yet, but India will get to middle income status.
Before I wrap up, there's a wager going on across around whether the bromance between Elon Musk and Donald Trump lasts. How long does it last, or will they have a blow up soon? Where do you come out of that?
I think that Musk is a unique character. All the other people Trump has been dealing with You know, okay, they're rich, but they're bankers. They're businessmen of a kind that Trump understands. Maybe they got luckier than Trump did, and so they're richer than he is. Elon Musk is on a completely different level. First of all, he is really the Thomas Edison of the age. I think Jamie Dimon called him the Einstein. That's not the correct analogy. He's Edison. He's Thomas Edison. Edison invented electricity, but then founded General Electric, a company, that did a whole bunch of different things. Musk is simultaneously running 3 or 4 of the most extraordinary companies in the world. He's technologically brilliant, and he is 50 times richer than Donald Trump. Sure. So when Donald Trump looks at somebody and he says, "Oh, I respect you because you have $2 billion more than me," this is in a different scale. Elon Musk's net worth is in the $400 billion range. Even Trump's wildest boasts don't even get so don't get him anywhere close to that. So that all I think that Trump has for Musk gives the relationship a lot more staying power. Now the complexity is Musk is a very strange character, and he could blow himself up. So it won't be Trump that will sour on Musk. Musk may just...
In what way?
I mean, he may just decide the whole thing is boring and he wants to take his marbles and go home. He might decide...
But he seems to be loving it. It's working well for him.
So far he is. And look, he loves the attention. He loves the... I was with him at the US Open tennis finals, and and he's a brilliant, smart guy. We're having a fascinating conversation. Boy, I did notice. I mean, the crowds were going crazy. We were sitting on one end of the game. Taylor Swift was on the other end. There was more interest in him than in Taylor Swift, and he loved that. So I think he loves that's something. You always have to remember, for politicians, that power of the adulation of crowds it's an addictive. It's bigger than any alcohol or drug high you could ever get.
So you're not betting on a blow up between the two.
I'm not betting on a blow up. I mean, I think it's complicated, but for those two reasons, Trump's admiration of Elon and Elon's love of this, the adulation of the crowds, they'll find a way to stay.
What replaces Donald Trump? This is his second, and I mean, as per norms, last term as American president. Is this the new course American politics has taken because it has a bearing on the rest of the world? Or do you think after Trump there's a reversion to mean?
No, I think that's, that the point of my book in some ways, Age of Revolutions, was this is not a spasm. This is not a fluke. We are in a different mode. For 30 years from the fall of the Berlin Wall, we were in an age of liberalization. Liberalization of trade, liberalization of politics, openness of technology, openness of cultural identities, more cosmopolitan, more multicultural. We are now in a backlash to that. I don't know if it'll be a 30-year backlash, but this is not a spasm. So I think we are in an age where there's going to be more cultural conservatism, more ethnic chauvinism, more nationalism, more protectionism. And, we're going to navigate that because those forces also have to operate in the real world. I mean, in the real world, the way economies are going to grow well is if they are market friendly, not if they're, having the state more and more involved. So there will be a tension, and there will be people always want to succeed. And you see this in Trump, right? On the one hand, he talks about America first and protectionism and tariffs and all that, but fundamentally, he wants the economy to grow. So there will be that tension, but it's a very different paradigm. The paradigm of from the fall of the Berlin Wall to the invasion of Ukraine, 30 years roughly, was liberalization. The paradigm now is a kind of, closed restraints on all these, the end of openness, if you will. It's a politics of being more closed, having barriers to immigration, to multiculturalism, to trade. It's a mindset of a world that says we saw a lot of change, we saw a lot of transformation, but stop the train. I want to get off, or at least slow it down a little.
Well, this has been one of the last conversations we're having at the World Economic Forum 2025, but it's also been one of the most fascinating, for taking out time and joining us and sharing your super sharp insights with our viewers. Farid Zakaria, thank you very much. Enjoy the skiing.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking out time.
Take
Thank
care.
you.